I'm doing very well. What about you?
I'm also doing good.
So, Nivedita, last time we were discussing, I went back to my visit to the US
Yes.
and I told you that when I told the American chief Carl Bono that Russia seems to be collapsing, or rather, Soviet Union is collapsing, he was very surprised. He offered to drink a toast on the occasion of the winning of the Cold War by the United States. So I told him, I said, I don't think I agree with you because the American economy is based on the military-industrial combined complex. They spent crores of dollars from the defense budget for Silicon Valley and for cutting-edge technologies, which are all based on there being an enemy and the country wanting to have better weapons, better technologies to overcome. So I said that if you don't have an enemy like the Soviet Union, then it appears to me that your military-industrial complex will die down. No government or public would be happy to give tens of thousands of crores of dollars for the development of new sciences and new technologies, cutting-edge technologies for military purposes. You would appreciate that in any country, the maximum technology and science is spent on military assets. There is a fallout from this, which goes to public. For instance, the cell phones that we use and others are all from satellite technology. And satellite technologies came because we wanted to observe what the enemy is doing and to gain knowledge for our own resources by satellite so that we can develop more technologies and weapons and equipment to overcome our competitors. As you know, that any nation with borders has an uncomfortable relationship with their neighbors. In America's case, because we are top dog in the world, they want to remain so. So anyone who tries to reach eminence in military and industrial and economic power, the Americans must make every effort to do him down. At that time, I'm talking of 1989, China had not come up. We all knew that China was going to come up, but I quote Napoleon Bonaparte when somebody asked him, what do you think of China? Because he was conquering the whole of Europe in his time. He said, there lies a mighty giant who is sleeping. Let him sleep, because if he wakes up, he will shake the world. That was Napoleon in about 1810 made this statement. So in America's case, if they found that the Soviet Union collapses and China was not a major contestant for number one position on the earth, then what would be the purpose of maintaining American arms, equipment, technologies, and so on? So he told me, all right, then let's discuss this. And we had no more program. I mean, I had a very busy few days in Washington. So he said, are you free for breakfast in the morning? I said, yes. So the ladies were not there, just Carl Bono and myself. He invited me to breakfast to a separate room in his living quarters, where we had a one-to-one chat for about an hour and a half. And we were trying to get my views as to what would be the future and what should be the action taken by the United States. Now, I must share with you that in my view at that time, as we grow older and as we get more experience, both you and I or anyone else, we do change our views. Because as we get more mature and the situation in the world changes, then our views and our opinions about what the future holds for us and what should we do about it, those views tend to change. At that stage of time when India was weak, and I did feel, and I said this to you before, that our government had to have time for development, for improving our economy and our military and industrial power. That takes time, especially for a nation like us, which has a massive population, many of whom don't have jobs and are under the poverty stricken. Much effort has to be spent to bring them up. With a billion population, which is billion plus population, we are like the continent of Europe, or for that matter, neither United States nor South America put together equals our population. So you see, the question of managing a population is very difficult. And future thinkers never expected India to ever reach a powerful status because we have this problem. I think we're getting there slowly, but at that time in 1989, I did feel that we need one powerful superpower, let's call it, to assist us in case our borders are violated by, let us say, China or Pakistan or anyone. Now, previously in the 71 war, I had explained to you earlier that Mrs. Indira Gandhi, then the Prime Minister, had got hold of the then Soviet Union to back us, which they did. And now the Soviet Union collapsing, it was clear in my mind that the only big shot power in case China becomes powerful is the United States. Therefore, I did favor, let us say, the power of the United States. Why? Because it's a democracy. It changes its government every 4 years. You don't have a single party or dictator ruling for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. See, now in our country also, we have a democracy. Jawaharlal Nehru was Prime Minister for almost 17 years. And Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister for more than that. But it's a democracy. So they were elected. And now Mr. Modi has been in power for nearly 8 years and nearly 9 years. And he hopes to get the next, no big deal. If he's in power again for another 5 years, we wait and see how that goes in the next election. But these are democratically elected people. In other words, the people in a democracy have the power to change their government if they so desire. Whereas the people in China and the then Soviet Union did not have that power. The Communist Party ruled, and with the result, you were at the mercy of that government, no matter what it decided to do. So therefore, I suggested to Carl Bono, I said, look, if you don't have an enemy, your industry and your military-industrial complex might start deteriorating. So you have to think about it. So he and I discussed these aspects as to what action they should take. And after this discussion, I did give him a few points, but he had many of his own. He decided to call together what he called a chief's conclave. Now, I didn't know what this chief's conclave was, so I asked him. He said, we have about 5 or 6 retired chiefs who have retired from the job after 4 or 5 years of acting in that high office, army chiefs. So he said, we can call for a chief's conclave where we can brief these people for a couple of months and then ask them to come to Washington on a single room to have a sort of a exercise, a mental exercise of giving their various views as to how the country should proceed with the type of situation that existed in the world at that point of time. When the chief retires, many of them don't necessarily know the latest situation, either in the world or in their own country, because they've left the office, and so they're not privy to the latest developments. So what Carl Warner said is that they spend about a month sending ADCs and papers to these retired chiefs after they've agreed to come. And then about 2 months later, they have a conclave where the chiefs can discuss basic problems of strategy, tactics, and of politics, if you like, in case the country sees certain dangers. And I was very interested to hear all about this as to how it's managed. But in their case, the whole chiefs conclave is based on strategic and tactical future actions that the country should take, both militarily and politically. So when I came back here, I did mention to some of our chiefs here that because I had already retired, there was no time for me to have something like this. I was about to retire. So eventually it was General Nirmal Vij who became the army chief around about 2001. He held the first chiefs conclave in India. And subsequently, most of the chiefs have held these chiefs conclave once in their tenure of 2 or 3 years or whatever it is. But I must share with you that these are more discussions to brief us on what's going on rather than hearing of views that what should be done in the future. That period of operational discussion is all reduced to about half an hour, and we can't really get people's views across. So I don't know how it goes on in the future. It depends on whoever is the chief as to how he manages to think of this. They also are very busy people. You know, India is on active duty all the time. Our borders are alive. We don't have peace and quiet to sit back and start thinking like many other countries can do. So I think our chiefs are very busy. But nevertheless, the advice I have given them is that we should spend more time on strategic discussion and tactical discussions rather than just briefing. And the briefing could be done before the chiefs claim by sending liaison officers to each chief with requisite papers and things for them to study so that they don't have to be briefed about what the latest situation is. So that was all about the chiefs conclave. Now that we see that the Ukraine war going on, many people wonder why America is and NATO is keeping on advancing to provoke, let us say, Russia, because of the NATO war-fighting capability coming closer and closer to the Russian national borders, with the result that this is fight over Ukraine, which is really a fight between the United States and the West on one side and Russia on the other. Ukraine is the poor guy in between who's getting bashed up by completely. Nobody's really concerned about what happens to them, do they say so. So I thought crossed my mind that maybe this action by NATO to keep producing an enemy and fighting is similar to the discussion that I had with the then Army Chief in America, Carl Bono, that the military-industrial combined complex of Russia keeps getting its funds, and they keep doing cutting-edge technology, both in space as well as in weapons and equipment and tactical techniques. Now, we come back to India, and as I said, John Chappell of England managed to get his visit to India approved by the government, having gone through the route of the foreign minister and the British ambassador, the British High Commissioner. Now, the British High Commissioner's house was next to mine, by the way, when I was the Army Chief. The Army Chief lives in 4 Rajaji Marg, and this chap was number 2 Rajaji Marg. He was David Goodall, and I had known David Goodall when I was Army Commander in Calcutta because he was the British Consul in Calcutta in those days. And when I became the Chief, he became the High Commissioner. Very interesting and fine man. And so he asked me, he said, look, I've been asked to sort of push this business of the British Chief visiting. I said, yes, David, you do that. That's the only way foreign ministry will be coaxed to say yes to our invitation. So, so John Chappell arrived, and he's a very fine, good corps officer. He became Field Marshal later and the Chief of Defense Staff. And our Army commander in Central Army at that time, based in Lucknow, was also a good corps officer, Lieutenant General Bill Moria, a fine officer. And he spoke Gurkhali, and so did John Chappell. So I sent him to Lucknow to be looked after by General Bill Moria. And General Bill Moria had the 11th Gurkha Rifles Regimental Center in Lucknow. So he gave a very good time to General Chappell and arranged for the shooting spree with the camera in Corbett Park and so on. All that is within the Army Commander's jurisdiction in Lucknow. That visit went off very well. And then John Chappell asked me that I must visit England too before I retire. Now, this is coming towards the end of 89, and I knew I was retiring in June 90. So I told him, I said, there's no time. He said, no, you must come. I said, it's not my turn, and I won't be able to fit this in because there's too many things happening in India in the early months of 1990, which I'll describe shortly. So I said, he said, no, you must come. So then he, as usual, approached his ambassador and foreign minister, and even spoke to Rajiv Gandhi. So I was requested to please change my plan and organize a visit to Britain, which I could manage to do just before my retirement in June 1990. More of that later. But John Chappell's visit went off very well, and I think he did agree and started helping India with the problems with British Royal Ordnance. Because British Royal Ordnance are making a lot of money out of us. As I explained earlier, certain equipment they gave us was not very good, and it was not new. It was purported to be new, and the spare parts, etc. problem was very bad. Anyway, I think between the Foreign Ministry of India and the Royal Ordnance, John Chappell, as being the Army Chief, and speaking to the Minister of Defense and so on, and the politicians in UK did manage to improve relations between British Royal Ordnance and our Foreign Ministry. Now, I had a couple of visits from other chiefs. Meanwhile, of interest is a French Army Chief. The French Army Chief came to me and he visited me. And he visited the Indian Army, and also he visited Government of India with their respective whatever program they had for him. He passed an interesting remark when he was with me. He said, how is it that some of your retired chiefs become governors and ambassadors? At that time, our naval chief was Admiral Taliani. He had retired, and he had become governor of Sikkim. Prior to that, some of our chiefs had retired in the military, army, or air force and become ambassadors or become governors or something. So I said, well, I suppose that's a tradition that happens in the British Army. And they pass it on. So if the government happens to be pleased with the chief who has served them, then they give him some sort of a job for a few years, 4 years, 5 years, as an ambassador or as a governor after his retirement, a cushy job. So the French chief tells me that, in his opinion, that's not the right thing to do. So I said, I agree with him. He asked me, are you going to be offered an ambassadorship or a governorship? I said, no, I'm not the sort of personality who's offered these sort of things, because then I stand my ground with the bureaucracy and others. But those who lead the bureaucracy or the government in many ways, they do get these cushy jobs. But I said the problem is that these jobs sometimes are very low ranking. For instance, one of our erstwhile chiefs, long before my time, went as ambassador to the Netherlands. And some of the foreign ministry officers said, if a foreign ministry officer had gone there, that would be the rank of a director in the foreign ministry, which is equivalent to a colonel or a brigadier. So it's a bit of a downside to take an assignment like that. Then some of our chiefs went to Canada, for instance. That again is equivalent to a joint secretary or something. So what I would say is that it's like a major general's job in the foreign secretary, but the retired army chief has to deal with a director level officer, the foreign minister. That's again a come down. Then one of our chiefs went as governor of Punjab. Here's one whom I knew very well. And again, he was dealing with a director level officer in the Home Ministry. Now, director level officers, the rank could be between a colonel or brigadier, or even less sometimes, depending on which state you're talking about. So I told the French chief that I personally would never accept an appointment like this. It will be a big come down. And I said that after one has served in the military and reached a high position, there's no need. But unfortunately, what happens is that the pay and perks of army officers in those days was very poor. With regard to the style of living and the type of education that one was giving their children required a lot of funds. And unless you had private income or unless your parents had given you a house of their own or something, you were really not in a position on a retirement pension to deal with your financial problems if you retire. So hence these officers were very willing to accept the job. We did put up a case that the pays and perks of military officers, including the army chief, should be increased so that they can live after retirement a life of some dignity, rather than go down to a business of trying to make both ends meet, getting a job with some corporate sector or anywhere else to try and make both ends meet. I'd like to say that the present government has improved the pay scales of both the bureaucracy as well as the military and civil service, and that the retirement pension is now much more reasonable and people can look after themselves and don't have, unless they wish to, they don't have to join a sort of a private company or something, or try and hope that the government gives them a job. Anyway, the French chief said that in France, ever since Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon had laid down that no retired military chief will ever be permitted to either work with the government after his retirement or with any private sector firm after his retirement. If he wanted to do his own job, own work, he could. And to assist his retirement, they would give him easy loans so they could construct a house, buy a car or something. And also easy loans in case he wanted for the education of his children. And they expected him to be a person who observes how the country is going after his retirement and write articles in the press, on the papers, to give his views in case he disagreed with the direction in which the country was moving. That way, the public interest rises in whatever the particular government is wanting to do. So he said, in our case, I'm surprised as a French chief that in India you have your chiefs being given these jobs. It's an interesting point of view. I tend to agree with that view, by the way, because I myself didn't want any of these jobs. But then I was perhaps a little better off because my father had a home, and so I could, you've seen my home, and my father had already given us a roof over our head, so I didn't have to construct a roof over my head that like many people have. And also today, the pensions are much better, but in the old days it was not. It's just an interesting point that whether it's a senior bureaucrat who retires, like secretaries to the government, they're all looking to get some jobs after that. Because then if they do that, they are kowtowing to certain public sector and private players in the country to give them a job. So if they're doing that while they're in service, they have to please those people, either please those bureaucrats or those politicians, or to please those corporate sector people. Now, I don't think when you're in a bureaucratic high office or in a military high office that you should be required to please anyone. You should be able to only please your country by doing the best you can for the nation, even though you have to tread on the toes of certain people, whether they are politicians or corporate sector or whoever. Anyway, that's my view. Another thing is that the Syrian chief visited. The chief from Syria was a very nice man. I mean, don't think of Syria much. It's a small country, and as you know, it has been through difficult times because of intervention by foreign countries in their affairs. But the Syrian chief gave me some points about how they conduct their affairs, which are very relevant to any country in the world. And I'm very pleased to talk to this gentleman. He also presented me a sword, a ceremonial sword. And I must tell you, he just said one thing to me. He said, the swords that are made from ancient times in Syria are the best in the world. Now, you may not believe this, but I have a number of swords in this house, presented by various people, including the Indian sword which we got, and including the British sword which my father used to carry. But the Syrian sword, as I agree, far, far superior. It's been with me now for about 40 years. And the steel is excellent, not a shadow of deterioration or rust or anything like that, which other swords do get. In other swords, you have to grease them and keep them clean, otherwise they get rusted. So this one, despite no attention, pristine, clear steel, excellent steel, very sharp, and a very good sword indeed. So that shows that in a small country like Syria, we have much to learn from them about the way they conduct their affairs. Now, I'll go on. When I had gone to America, I told you that we had gone to Hawaii first. And the person in charge in Hawaii, the military officer who was my host, was a Lieutenant General Kicklighter. Now, Kicklighter, I found him a very decent man, very good man, very honest and simple man, if you ask me. And I had a staff officer with me, Lieutenant General Ajay Singh, who unfortunately passed away a few days ago at the age of 88. He's also been governor of Assam, very fine officer of the Indian Armored Corps from the Puno Horse. And we saw an exercise of a divisional headquarters in the in Hawaii in an Excel. And when we visited there, General Ajay Singh tells me, he says, I'm not very happy with the tactical acumen of the Americans in the deployment and way they are functioning in the divisional headquarters. I said, I agree with you. So Ajay asked me, he said, do you mind if I tell General Kicklighter what I think of it? I don't know, it's up to you. You can say what you like. So he bided his time because that was an official get together during the exercise. But in the evening, when we went to General Kicklighter's dinner, General Ajay Singh maybe had a few drinks, and he let him have it in public in front of all the guests. There must have been about 30 guests there. To say that you, American general, you're going to destroy your troops in battle if the way you showed us this divisional headquarters exercise is perfectly incompetent. He says if the enemy has any sense of military capability and has artillery fire, none of you would survive because you're not protected. You don't dig down. You don't take certain drills and actions which the Indian Army can teach you if you want. Please let him have. Kicklighter was chastised and he was very accepting of what was said. And he told General Ajay Singh, he said, sir, I will certainly try and improve this. And I hope you visit us again next time and I shall do much. So then Kicklighter asked me that he would be wanting to visit India to see more of the Indian Army. I think he was quite impressed with the dressing down that he got from General Ajay. So I said, how do I get you to India? He said, you're going to see my chief, Mr. Calvano in Washington. Why don't you request him? 2 points from me. One is that I'm going to retire after a year or so I want another job. Let's say in the Ministry of Defense or something. If you recommend, maybe I'll get it. And the other, if you can permit me to visit India for a few years. So I'd asked Calvano to let him come to India. And Calvano said, certainly, General, if you recommend him, I should certainly put his name forward to the Minister of Defense. Defense Secretary, as they call them, Secretary of Defense. And yes, after he retired, he was given a job in the Office of the Secretary of Defense as a military advisor. But meanwhile, he was also permitted to come to India. And so my Vice Chief, Lieutenant General V K Sood, from the Dogra Regiment, was asked to host him. And so Kicklighter was hosted by us. And he spent a week with us. And I made sure that he visited Nathula and Sikkim. Because, you know, our aircraft here are much slower in those days. And so it took us time to reach a person all the way to Sikkim and back. But he spent a whole couple of days there, went up to Nathula. I wanted him to see that India was facing Chinese troops just 40 yards away at a height of 14,200 feet in Nathula. And he was very impressed indeed. And he came back and he told me that we thought it's only a problem between India and Pakistan and India. He didn't realize that we've got such a huge army facing China. I said to him, he said, I wish you would pass it on, not only to the Americans, but to the British and to the Europeans, because they don't know that the Indian army is facing the Chinese on the Tibetan border. That was 1989. I said, because in the future, in the next number of years, when China becomes powerful, this is going to be a very alive border. And so It's not a question of equating India with Pakistan. You have to equate India with China. And one of these days we'll have to reach the stage of being equated with anyone. He was very impressed with that, and he did go back and explain to his chief and to the defense ministry his views about this. I don't think it had much of a change in the American military mind or political mind, but nevertheless, he made an effort. Hitler also was explained by us the question of terrorism. Americans don't understand terrorism. They think that, Indians are not handling terrorism in Kashmir and Punjab and other places adequately because he says your own people are antagonistic with you. I used to explain to them that that's not so. It's a question of a border with a nation which is really, that's Pakistan, is a terrorist nation. People don't accept that because you people support Pakistan as your very close friend in those days in 89. But I said, and their propaganda, Pakistan propaganda is very good, I must say. They try and convince you that India's problem of terrorism is internal to India and not activated by Pakistan, which of course is not true. And they don't understand this business. They try to explain. I said, one of these days, when terrorism comes to the United States, then you will understand that your own people are helping the terrorists to do certain actions. And then, as you know, 9/11 took place in 2021 when those planes attacked the World Trade Center and went into the World Trade Center. About 3,000 Americans were killed. Now, those people who manned those planes were mostly of Arab descent. Osama bin Laden, who perhaps led that show from Saudi Arabia and from Afghanistan in his time, was maybe the kingpin, but got sleeping cells in America. But the people who were activated in the sleeping cells in the United States were of Arab descent mostly. About the 12 or 15 people involved in those attacks, as came out in the American news, were about 10 or 11 of them were Arab descent. I think there was one Iraqi, not a single Afghan. And yet when President George W. Bush decided to take revenge for this attack, he went into Afghanistan. And then he went into Iraq, whereas neither Afghanistan nor Iraq were really the ones responsible for this attack. According to our intelligence, it was, in fact, the Saudi group. But Saudi Arabia and America were very good friends. They had oil deals, and most of the two Bush presidents, the elder Bush and the younger Bush, and even Clinton and even Kennedy had a lot of investments in Arab oil and so on. They're very friendly with the Arab nations. Therefore, they didn't want to blame. Now, this leads me to another point. In the United Nations Charter, the country is not permitted to intervene in another country's affairs. I spoke to you much earlier about the Treaty of Westphalia, which was organized by Admiral Richelieu of France. Not Admiral, but Cardinal Richelieu. He was the regent of France till Louis XIV became the king. I'm talking about 1800 and about 1740 or so. 1740 or so. There were a lot of wars in Europe. And he did the Treaty of Westphalia, where he decided the four great armies in the world at that time. There was the French army, there was the Polish army, there was the Spanish army, and there was the Italian army under the Pope. These were four great powers at that time. And he got them one by one to sign a treaty to say that we will not interfere in the borders, first decide a border, and then we will not interfere in the border of another king or another prince. What that king or prince does within his borders is his business, and it's up to his people to accept it or not accept it as the life goes. Now, later when the first League of Nations and then United Nations were organized, one of the principles that was decided in the United Nations and earlier in the League of Nations, that no country will intervene in the borders of another country. But now, because America is very powerful, United States, it intervenes at liberty in anyone's country when they think something is wrong according to their intelligence. That's against the charter. Many times that intervention is without the permission of the United Nations, because they know that they can't get a majority in the United Nations if they want to do something. So they've interfered in Libya, they've interfered in Iran and Iraq, they've interfered in Afghanistan, they've interfered in Korea, they've interfered in Vietnam without a clear acceptance by the United Nations. So we do believe that if you have an organization, the United Nations, then countries must be responsible enough to not intervene in some other country's borders for whatever reason, unless the world body accepts that intervention. Now we talk of Russia going into Ukraine today, and the Americans are saying, oh, they've crossed an international border that's against the UN Charter. But how can the Americans say this when they themselves had done it hundreds of times? They've interfered in Sudan, they've interfered, as I said, in so many countries. So the top nations of the world don't seem to obey the rules of conduct laid down by themselves in an organization like the United Nations. The result of this that you have conflict. Now, the conflict in Ukraine, we see where it goes. But they say, oh, Russia did unprovoked attack against Ukraine. It's certainly not unprovoked. This provocation to Russia has been going on for the last almost 20 years. Ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, the Americans still wanted to take action against them, advancing NATO, this North Atlantic Treaty Organization based in Europe, further and further eastward, and even bringing their nuclear radars and weapons closer and closer to the Soviet, or rather to the Russian borders, which no country would like to accept. I told you about this earlier, the Cuban Missile Crisis that took place in 1962, that we almost had a nuclear conflict between Russia, between Soviet Union then and America, was because Mr. Khrushchev, the then president of the Soviet Union, tried to put nuclear missiles into Cuba. And the American President Kennedy said, you can't do that to my backyard. I will not accept Soviet weapons in my backyard. And so the Khrushchev had to tell him on the phone that similarly, I don't accept your nuclear weapons close to my backyard. So you can't, as the top nation of the world, permit yourself to do anything you like, but not permit others to follow the same principle. There's a lot of roads to be covered in the future to get peace on earth. I personally see no question of peace on earth if top nations do not obey the rules laid down by the United Nations. It's a good idea, the United Nations. Unfortunately, the UN does not have a military force to enforce the decisions. In any case, a nation like America or Russia, for that matter, or China, they've got too large a military control of themselves to obey or to be subservient to any military force that the UN may like to raise. So there's a certain amount of responsibility that is necessary to nations which become very powerful to run a peaceful earth. Otherwise, there's not going to be a peaceful earth, as we can see. This conflict in Europe, we will see where it goes, but it is already almost destroyed completely the little country of Ukraine. No doubt it is not correct of the Russians to enter sovereign country's border, but nevertheless, why was it provoked, and why was this sovereign country ready to join? I'm talking of Ukraine, ready to join Ukraine, to join NATO and get NATO protection, and therefore we put NATO weapon, which is closer and closer to the next door, to deep inside the Russian territory, not acceptable. So we see where that goes. Now, Nivedita,